Our next discussion is a fireside chat with General Austin Scott Miller. We are not related. Scott Miller is the former commanding officer of JSOC. Most of you know what that is, the Joint Special Operations Command. It's the special operators from all of the branches of the service that go where others can't go and do things that others can't do. He's done a lot of that, and the most important accomplishments of his military career are the ones we'll never find out about because they went just the way they were planned. And he's going to be interviewed by Ali Velshi, who is, as you all know, well, not all of you, most of you probably watch CNN, but for the ones that watch MSNBC, he has a great show, and he's a brilliant journalist. So let's welcome our fireside chat with General Miller and Ali Velshi.
We're going to start with some ratings comparisons. John, thank you. That was a remarkable introduction. Thank you all for being here. What a great and important gathering of people on such august ground. And General Miller, thank you for being here. We've covered a lot of ground today, but one of the things that has become important for all Americans, including John's viewers at CNN, the dozens that they have, and mine, is this discussion about political violence. It used to be an abstraction. It used to be something left for experts like yourself and many of the people in this room to talk about. It used to be something that happened in other lands, and we're going to cover a lot of it because there's a great deal of overlap. Nothing that's happening in the United States right now is unique to the United States, but it always seems more serious when it starts to happen here. So let's move from the outside in for the moment. We'll leave the U.S. Aside for just a second. We are seeing political violence taking place not just in the usual places to which we're accustomed, but we're seeing it, for instance, in northern, western, and central Europe. We've seen the rise of far-right nationalist parties through the peaceful electoral process, but parties that have espoused violence. What's your sense of how seriously we should be taking those threats as they arise?
First of all, I actually saw some West Point cadets in the upper balcony. I've lost, there you are over there. All right. Just so you know, it's kind of a...
Well,
one of the challenges you'll find as you go on with your military careers is submitting to a very unstructured interview process with a very professional journalist who goes in different directions. What you'll notice, I'll answer the question the way I want to, not necessarily the way it's asked. First of all, and then to the Soufan Center, thank you very much for the invitation back, and to all in the crowd here. And certainly there is a perspective. You said something, you referred to expert. I think you were pointing at me as it relates to violence, political violence, or terrorism. I don't claim that title, all right? It's I would say practitioner, observer, have learned some things along the way, but expertise kind of indicates you've arrived, and I don't believe I've arrived. I believe there's still a lot more to be.
Well, in our world, it just means you got booked on TV.
There you go. And we have a couple of those too. But so, take my perspectives as a, from that point of view. And then we're sitting in the shadow of, the events of 9/11. I spent yesterday with the fire department, other first responders. I, joked it's from sun up to sundown, and sundown goes very late with the fire department here in New York City. But it was it was very inspiring. Let's talk violence, political violence in general. If you think about, and I'm going in a little bit broader than just counterterrorism. If you think about a government's responsibility, if you are a legitimate government, one of the things you do is you protect the citizens of your country, whatever your, I guess, the Westphalian concept of a country is, but you protect, you provide the capability to protect your citizens, and your citizens don't live with this sense of insecurity. Now, we know across the world that that's not a reality. There are a lot of people that are, feeling like they're in very vulnerable positions, and subject to violence, whether it be political or sectarian,
Right.
or what you may have. But we're in a very complicated time frame. I've said that and I'll just very quickly, because I'm cognizant of our time. I was asked by a group, and I hadn't really thought of this before, but a group younger than me, so maybe 40s, and they said, tell us, Scott or General, whatever they call me, they said, tell us when you've seen something like this in your lifetime so we can make sense of what's going on in just the United States. And I said, I think you have to go broader than the United States. I think you might have to start looking across the globe, and I'm not sure it's my lifetime. I mean, I was a child in the 60s, and I remember political violence. I remember assassinations of our political figures, our civil rights leaders. I almost have now gone back to looking at trying to understand the period between the end of World War I and the commencement of World War II. And I look at it not just from a violent standpoint, but a very populist movement, a time we were in the Great Depression at that point. So there's a lot of things out there, and that's how I dial out and try to understand what we're seeing today.
The rise of Germany was, at least those who took power attributed it to things have gone bad. It's not your fault. It's someone else's fault.
Right.
We need to fix that. So we've got some of that happening in Europe. We've seen some electoral pushback in the United Kingdom. We've seen some in France. We've seen the rise of right-wing power in Poland, again in Hungary. So it's not a given that the countries with which we are aligned on the basis of democratic principles and a remarkable defense alliance, the strongest in the world, which you are an expert on, that becomes a little bit tricky, because generally speaking, whether European governments or Canada or the United States have had more conservative or more liberal governments, fundamentally around the issue of rights and violence and how society is structured, we've been the same. There are small cracks in that.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And I'd go beyond Europe. We're not even thinking about Africa.
Right.
But
we're
if you
going
go
to get
out,
there, yeah.
let's go out to the Pacific. And, part of what drove World War II wasn't just a European activity. It was something happening in the Pacific as well. So again, when I look at the entire complexity, and we can call it violence, we can call it turbulence, we can call it uneasiness, and then there's a trust factor. Do we trust our governments to?
And do our governments trust each other?
Correct.
This has become a very, very salient point right now. Let's go to the Middle East. Simple topic we can cover in 2 or 3 minutes. Everybody's worried about the Middle East on many, many levels, and there's been a lot of sophisticated discussion about it here today. When looking at that map of blinking red lights, there's one that's blinking a little brighter for you, and it's having to do with Lebanon.
Yeah, I think Lebanon. Everyone's talking about when does the Israeli Hezbollah war begin? I'm not sure it ever stopped, and if you actually step back from day to day and you look at that particular fight, and I listened to the panel on the axis of resistance, and so what happens? What has happened? What has come? Certainly at full surface since 6-7 October is we've got the Red Sea, and someone I think rightly pointed out it may not be the major geopolitical issue out there, but disrupting global commerce is that's kind of one of those things that starting to sound strategic. You obviously have a lot of human suffering on all sides that are taking place,
and you can sway elections, including in the United States.
Absolutely. So I've been watching the exchange, and I don't know how it resolves itself. I would like it to resolve itself diplomatically, but moving the number 60 to 100,000 Israelis back to the north that are living in hotels. I don't know how sustainable that is, how long you can do that. And then same in southern Lebanon, and when does this go beyond southern Lebanon? We've seen a couple. We've seen Shakur, obviously in a very strategic strike in downtown Beirut. There was a strike in January against Aruri. So you're into the Beirut suburbs with kinetic action, and obviously there's a lot of other things going on there. Now everybody's going on as if life is, Beirut is the same, Tel Aviv seems to be pretty much the same, but there's there's conflicts surrounding all that sameness.
Let's move into Africa for a moment. We know that vacuums in governments are very bad for our own safety here in the United States, across the world, across the West, and we are seeing increasing opportunities for vacuums in Africa. The situation in Sudan is getting worse. It is a famine unlike the world has seen in quite some time. There are atrocities and violations of human rights going on both sides of that war, and both sides are benefiting from the support and recognition of various governments around the world.
Yeah. And largely, the world doesn't pay personally close enough attention to Africa. I'm friends with Ambassador Molly Fee, so if she starts talking about different things, I direct my attention and try to get a little smarter about what is going on in Sudan. I'm not an Africa expert. I understand East Africa a little bit, North Africa, but you start getting deeper into the interior, I'd say I'm surface level at best. But what you see, and this is, the subject is counterterrorism. Do not believe that we're not going to have a problem. We, collectively, we can call it the West, or we can call it the United States, or we can call it our friends, the countries that we're partnered with what's happening with the ISIS growth. Shabab, we've never really, it's still there. It's going on in Somalia. It's been going on for many, many years. A lot of actions against it, not comprehensive, but actions against them, and they just seem to still be there. But I think we're talking about in Western Africa and other parts.
And we used to think about things in terms of non-state actors and state actors and the intersections between them, but they seem to have been blurred very clearly these days, because there always seems to be a state actor willing to step up if there's a non-state actor that's being disruptive enough.
That's been the case in the past. Now, again, and maybe you see a fair amount of exploitation going on in Africa. The Wagner groups, they're competing. Right? By the way, the Wagner Group is not this invincible organization by any means, but they're there, and it's and we've lost some basing rights. I just read something the other day where we were trying to make up for those loss of basing rights and create some new partnerships. But every time you do that, you're starting from a ground zero.
When I speak to journalists or others around the world who are quite focused on the U.S. election coming up in a couple of months, their questions seem to be beyond who do you think is going to win the election. It becomes what happens after the election, and the question seems to live regardless of who wins the election. From a political violence perspective, which is not a discussion you and I would have likely had prior to 2020. From a political violence perspective in America, what do you worry about after November 6th?
To me, is where I go on election, we're going to have one. I don't try to get into much deeper discussion than that, because it's not a conversation I like to partake in. And and people go, what are you for? I go, I'm for the United States of America. That's where I vote. And so just make sure that's clear. I'm not I don't choose sides in terms and who I vote for is my personal, it's one of my rights. Obviously, we don't want to see political violence. The one thing the United States needs to come out of this election, and it's a question of whether we will, it's, at least aspirationally, do people believe in their government? Do they believe in the rule of law? Do they believe in the correctness of the election process? And let's face it, we live in an information environment. Everyone here has got an iPhone. It's, I call those a cursing and a blessing. We're energized with information that just kind of keeps feeding us the things we want to read. And in many cases, it's lack of trust in our elected officials. And I think that's got to be one of the critical requirements for our country, after we come out of this election. But gone are the days where there's that deep reach across the aisle, and somehow we need to try to find that. But you're right.
But as a student of history, there are some people who say that we could have a civil war. And that doesn't feel to me like what we think about when we think of our own civil war that we've had in this country, where it's pitched battles against groups of people who are wearing their team's side. there's an intersection between the stochastic violence that we have in this country, the, whatever you want to call it, the gun issue that we have in this country, and this distrust in both the government and the system. That feels like a bad recipe in a culture.
It does. I mean, I'm looking at this audience out here. You know, I don't know what everybody thinks. Somebody may think very hard one way or the other and of what they could and could not tolerate. Catastrophic for us to even really consider something like a civil war.
But to the extent that you would like, and I know this is a view of yours that's not political, but you believe the military, it is important that the military is trusted. Right. And in many, many countries, you've seen examples where sometimes the military is the last institution that is trusted by people. After they've lost faith in the political process and the police and the gangs and the militias. In this particular country, what does the military need to be thinking about as it relates to the election and post-election safety?
The military needs to be an apolitical institution. I mean, first and foremost. And interestingly enough, when I went to Afghanistan in 2018, it's pre-COVID. We hadn't had the Black Lives Matter protests. Certainly, 6 January had not happened. But one of the things that I found it important to talk to our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen. And I said, aren't we fortunate? And they just look at me and go, what do you mean, sir? We're here in Afghanistan. They all wanted to be there. But the point, I said, aren't we fortunate? I said, we wear this uniform and we have an oath. We take an oath of office, whether we're enlisted or it's reread the oath of office as a officer upon promotion. I said, we swore to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. So everybody else can kind of get a little bit riled up out here, but we as an institution have a great responsibility. I think Mark Milley used to talk about that a lot too. And that's where the military needs to be. Now, some of that trust is eroded if you believe the public surveys. That's not a good place. But I'll tell you, internal to the military, having any of the conversations you're talking about with a little bit of bravado and maybe some threat, that can't be tolerated either. It just cannot be tolerated. And we need to keep our government institutions very trusted.
We've seen the erosion of trust in the FBI, not by virtue of anything the FBI did, it's because they became a political football.
Absolutely.
So the similar situation in the military, right? Is it anything the military's done when you look at these? Look, the media rate's lower than everybody, but we actually, there are reasons for that are probably valid. But in the case of the military, there aren't. So what do you do about the fact that there are erosions in trust in a crucial institution like the military in the United States, not because of anything that people in the military have largely done?
How about I would say that the military sometimes sits a little bit too quiet for fear of being perceived as political. But I will just tell you, whether as you become more senior, you don't have to engage in rhetorical battles. I don't think you gain any points by winning a tit-for-tat war. But you ought to be very sure that in a fact-free environment that's critical of an institution, somebody trusted needs to be standing up saying that's not true. That's not true. That's not who we are. And you need to say it over and over. You have to compete in that environment.
You think somebody in the military, senior in the military, or people like you who are outside of it?
Well, I mean, people like me can say that, but it's it's the chairman's job. It's the secretary's job. It's it's the chiefs of services. And all I'm saying is you don't get into a big fight over it. But
just say it. You're on the record.
It's similar to the Taliban making a crazy accusation against the Resolute Support Mission.
Right.
You have to have somebody credible that can stand up, doesn't have to get in a big argument with them going, that's not true, and stop it. And I really believe that's you're competing. You're not winning an argument, but you have to compete for falsehoods.
We've been talking about terrorism and political violence. There's blurriness between them. Often you'll hear a president or a political leader say after something has happened that there is no place for political violence in America. Do you believe that is a universally held belief?
In America?
Yeah, amongst American citizens.
No, I believe there's some Americans that believe that it can be resolved by some type of violence. And that's, again, where your institutions have to be solid. And you've visited, and you've seen it. Anybody who has not visited some of the war zones, it's not a place we even want to start to go down.
Right.
We've watched, everyone talks about, hey, well, Afghanistan was beautiful in the 70s. Well, it's not now. Iraq, was this paradise. It's not now. I mean, it's got some good parts to it. Lebanon, we've seen it. So when you start getting into that place where the institutions break down.
It doesn't end well.
No, it doesn't. There is not a good outcome there. And people that believe that, it just needs to be addressed very quickly.
General, thank you for your time. We appreciate you addressing it.
Thank you very much, Alan.
And we appreciate your optimism.
We can go meet some cadets now?
That's right. Thank you, everybody. General Miller.